There's this meaning to the phrase, we'll see. In some movie, there was a character who was explaining the story and saying that there was a 14-year-old boy who got a horse, and someone said, "Oh, that's so great." And then the minister said, "We'll see." And then the boy was riding the horse and he broke his leg. And someone said, "Oh, that's terrible. He broke his leg." And then the minister said, "Oh, we'll see." And then a war came, and all the young men went off to the war. And because the young boy broke his leg, he didn't have to go to war. And someone said, "Well, that's really great." And then the minister said, "We'll see." And from there, it could have been a lot of different things that happened. Maybe if he had gone to the war, he would have gotten killed. Um, or maybe if he had gone to the war, he would have been a hero and his whole life would have been on a different direction. It's really hard to tell what the significance of an event is at the time of the event, and sometimes even until the very end, we might not know what the significance of an event is. And this is sort of applicable with all that's been going on with Israel and Iran and the United States and this surprise ceasefire, which was a really great thing that happened. And it is a testament to President Trump's persuasiveness or his clout or his influence. But it also shows a couple things. One, the basic thing is that a really awful, disastrous, destructive war was averted, which is the best news ever. And it appears to be averted. There's some questions still about the ceasefire and maybe some rockets and things going up, but there's a reason to believe that it's going to be real. Um, However, what it does show is that maybe all along the you know the premise of the war is still in question, um, because about a month or so ago, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, had said there was no real certainty that Iran was building a bomb at this point. And so far, no one's been able to provide that proof. No one has come forward and said, here's intelligence that we relied on to convince us that Iran was close to building a bomb. Maybe that's coming forward. Maybe they have it. But despite discussion, no one has provided that. And it's almost a little bit akin to the Iraq weapons of mass destruction, except there are much more clear signs here. I mean, Iran did build a secret underground facility. They were enriching uranium up to 60% that could have been brought up higher to weapons grade. They did have all these things. So they definitely positioned themselves in the place where they could have. But whether now is any different than a year ago or whether they really were on the verge, no one has brought forth that information yet that would have justified Israel striking them at this point. And then I guess once Israel did it, then the U.S. joined in, and so that's an unknown. But it's sort of not the point. Well, it still is kind of the point, but it's not so much the point anymore. The main point is that there isn't a huge disaster that came out of that decision, at least at this point. Um, but we'll see. And what that might mean in this case is, um, and President Trump is an enigma. And if you were to wind back, 8 years or something, and to see everything that's happened, everyone would have been totally surprised from that time that he came down the stairs or the escalator, and right before making his announcement that he was going to run for president. And um, that's who he was before this. Well, he was a ruthless, you know, womanizing, greedy, egotistical businessman. And um, and but in his last message or address, when he talked about having bombed Fordow, he ended the speech with saying, "We love you, God." And I don't think I've ever heard a president say that before. Not, God bless America, all these things that are safe, but he actually said, "We love you, God." Um, and some surprising things about him. His grandparents, or I think grandparents, great grandparents, they were part of a revival in Wales, and so he has got this Welsh revival background to him. And apparently, after his brother died, some major change came over him. And even during his first term, he was, apparently the president, maybe most since Ronald Reagan, maybe even more than Ronald Reagan, who actually cared about prayer meetings. That being said, he just said the F word on TV today, and all these different things. So he's a puzzle. But and what we'll see means in his case is he he believes that God spared him from that assassination attempt for a reason, and he's doing all these things in the economy that even Warren Buffett said that Trump is making the smartest moves, of anyone in the last 50 years, I think. And um, there apparently appear to be these, the negotiation of peace with India and Pakistan, all these various victories, and it, a lot of good. And it may be that he finishes out his 4 years and does not make any huge mistakes. Um, one thing, it is difficult to be a human and to be given that much power, and very few people can act faithfully with that amount of discretion and that amount of freedom. And a lot of what is restraining us and me and everyone else from doing worse things is that, we're just not able to. And, put people in a situation where they can do anything they want, then, you sort of see like, oh, where we're really at and what's inside of us. And this idea of, we'll see, applies not just to, world events and did this end up being a good thing or a bad thing. There is an argument that Iran's rational reaction in accepting the ceasefire indicated they weren't so apocalyptic after all and irrationally bent on destroying Israel, because if they were, then they would have, in the face of destruction of their nuclear capability, and they would have gone forward with blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and then they would have maybe even tried to bomb Israel with a dirty bomb. None of which they did. So they're acting very rationally, and there probably is an argument that the way to deal with Iran, even though they were so at such a high pitch, of intensity, is to just be very rational and consistent and factual with them. And that's a viewpoint, and maybe everything happened the way it did for a reason. Um, but one thing from here is that it will strengthen President Trump's influence, and that could be a good thing. And it also could end up being a bad thing. And like the Nile River overflowing creates, it's a bad, but then it creates fertility in the plain, and that's good. But then with the fertility in the plain, they raise crops, and that's good. But then with the power of crops, then they make weapons, and then they invade. That's bad. All these different things, all these relationships, and it applies in our own lives as well. Sometimes things we think that are bad are actually good. And sometimes things that we think are good, we have to be very careful, because they may be good, but they can easily lead us to bad. And so our intake assessment of good and bad, it has to be tied to this higher question. And in a sense, our lives, ultimately, the we'll see in our lives relates to how did we fit the pattern of the calling or the purpose that we were created for by God. And that's the ultimate we'll see. So every event in our lives, in itself, is not so relevant as the fact of the place of that event and how it relates to the ultimate fulfillment of the purpose that we're given by God, the nature. And I know for myself, it's a very tempting world to live in, and that a lot of mistakes can be made the more opportunities we're given. And so, one thing that is a safety for me, which I'm not saying it's a fail safe, but is a safety, is to learn and think that my purpose is to know God. And that's the that that's the path I want to travel up. It's just to know God and to keep that first. And it is useful in the sense it prevents goals from becoming an idol, which often goals are. And I heard this very interesting thing the other day. I don't even know who was saying it, but I just saw him saying it. And he was saying that he interviewed this televangelist. I assume it was um, uh, I forgot the guy's name, but he was the one that David Wilkerson called out, and Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. I assume it was him. Um, and he said, I guess it was whoever this televangelist was who was in prison. He was talking to this other guy, and he said that he continued to love Jesus the whole time he was sinning. And the other guy got upset. He said, "How could you say that? How he started challenging him and saying, well, you're not, you can't be serious. You were doing all these things, sexual sin, and all the and mismanagement of funds, and all this stuff, and fraud. And how can you say that you were loving Jesus?" And he said, "No, no, I really." He said, "I really was." And he said, "But what I didn't have was the fear of God." And I said, "Oh, that's very interesting." And you wonder how a lot of the people who have fallen and are being exposed as having fallen, and even the part of us that is able to be in the same place of falling, how it may not be enough to think that we love Jesus, but that it's also necessary to have the fear of God.